Hey everyone, Andang here on the beta server, taking a look at the new Allegiances panel that's coming with the Mordor expansion. Now currently none of the quests or anything like that are available, but we can see the descriptions of each of the different allegiances we can make. So in the first tab here we do have the Kingdom of Gondor, which says the War of the Ring has been won, which is technically true I guess for Gondor. The war has been won for Gondor, but the overall War of the Ring does not end until after the Scouring of the Shire. So that's kind of a weird statement to begin things off here, but let's continue on. But now Aragorn must secure the young peace against those who would endanger it. Swear your allegiance to Gondor and you will aid the new king as he seeks to make safe his lands and his people. So that is true. Gondor does make a lot of peace deals and arrangements and things like that right after the fall of Sauron, which makes me wonder how the whole power grab in Mordor is working with all the different groups, because I know the Easterlings eventually surrender to Gondor, and I think that there might be some Easterling groups in Mordor that are still fighting. I could be wrong on that, and I might have just misremembered, but it'll be very interesting to see how these peace agreements work, and I think that this would be a pretty cool diplomatic type storyline, which is something we don't really get into, is the politics that go on in Middle-earth, and so I think this would be really interesting, actually. Next up, we do have the Court of Lothlorien, which says, while Gondor faced the armies of Mordor, the western lands of elves faced trials of their own. That's true. Lothlorien was actually invaded 3 times by the evil orcs of Dol Guldur, and they've repelled them all 3 times, and then they go and continue their invasion, because LOTRO's kind of playing with the timeline a bit, but they do continue their invasion in and take out Dol Guldur and all that stuff. Now that the war is ended, many preparations are underway. So that sounds like that they've already taken out Dol Guldur and all that stuff. Swear your allegiances to Galadriel and Celeborn in Lothlorien, and you will aid the cause of the elves there, in Rivendell, and beyond. So this is really interesting for a few reasons. The first one being that we are going to apparently be swearing allegiance to Galadriel and Celeborn in Lothlorien. That's fairly normal. And you will aid the cause of the elves there, so in Lothlorien, in Rivendell, and beyond. So a few things stand out to me. First of all, many preparations are underway. Swear your allegiance to Galadriel and Celeborn in Lothlorien, and you will aid their causes of the elves there, so we will be helping them in Lothlorien, Rivendell, and beyond. So the war's done, apparently, so they've already taken care of Dol Guldur, presumably, and are basically preparing to depart and go to see Arwen and Aragorn's wedding. So we're going to presumably be helping all the elves get ready to go to the wedding. And maybe even go to the wedding in this. I don't know. This is pretty interesting. I think it's kind of weird that it's the Court of Lothlorien, but I'm guessing there's a lot of Lothlorien story, and then a little bit about Arwen and everything that's going on there. So this is a very elvish plotline for this point in history, so that makes sense. Everything about that, I think, makes a lot of sense. The third category here is Durin's folk, which says, as the War of the Ring drew to a close, the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain defied the armies of Sauron, which is true. They fought for quite a bit around the Lonely Mountain and everything like that. Dine Ironfoot, the king under the mountain, fell before the gates of Erebor, and his son Thorin III succeeded him to the throne. Swear your allegiance to Durin's folk, and you will aid the new king under the mountain as he seeks to ensure their place in Middle-earth. So this sounds kind of like Heightbold type stuff, where we'll be rebuilding Erebor, because that's a big part of what Thorin III did, is just completely rebuild that entire kingdom. So that sounds like what we're doing, not too much combat stuff, which I find kind of interesting. I figured that these type of allegiance things would include more of what was going on at the immediate time right after, but I'm guessing that they think that it would take too long for our characters to travel there. But hopefully we'll have some type of flashback missions or session plays or something that'll let us see the battles that take place in Lothlorien and here by the Lonely Mountain. What is really cool about this is it means that we will be going to the Lonely Mountain. There's almost no way that this synopsis means that we would not be going there, so I'm guessing that that is going to be happening. Also, depending on how far in the timeline this moves forward, it could also include the founding of the Glittering Caves as a colony, because that does become a dwarven colony that was set up by Thorin III, and so and Gimli as well, obviously, because it's Gimli's major passion. But So we could be working with Gimli here as well, and just helping out Durin's folk in general. So this sounds like a really interesting plotline. Is probably the one I'm most excited about, because it does sound like it's adding in Erebor, which would be just really cool to finally be seeing in LOTRO. We do know from the developer live stream that they did early on from the first round of beta that they did show a small like back side wall that just looked like everything else. But what was interesting is that Quartermaster Yu wanted so badly to turn around to be able to show presumably what was Erebor, and that would have been really, really cool. So it does sound like that there will be new landscape with this area, and possibly also this area as well. I think it's fairly likely that we would be going at some point, at least in a flashback or side thing, to something related with Mirkwood, which is awesome. I did not expect that we would be going to all these different places in Mordor, since, you know, Mordor itself is really, really big. Already, we got a clear 10-level area that is going to have no problem, I think, once it's filled with quests to be able to do that. It's a huge area. Plus, on top of that, we're presumably getting new landscapes with these allegiance areas, which would just be so cool if that is what is going to be happening. I think that would be fantastic. And finally, we do have Hobbits of the Company, which is an interesting thing to make allegiance to, but it does make sense, I suppose. The four hobbits have been through a great deal on their own journey to the gates of Mordor, but now are hailed as princes among the men of Gondor. Swear your allegiance to Merry, Pippin, Frodo, and Sam, and you will join them in celebration adventures and a good number of hearty meals around the environs of Ithilien and Mordor. So this one is an interesting one, because I don't really understand this Mordor thing, except for maybe the fact that we will be saving the hobbits or somehow involved in that, but from a lore perspective I don't think that should be the case. And so if that's not the case, I don't think we'll be re-entering Mordor after the fact with the hobbits, so this is kind of makes me scratch my head a bit as to how this is going to work. Ithilien makes perfect sense. They rest there for a long time in the field of Cormallen, and they have this big ceremony with Aragorn, and do get recognized presumably as princes and things like that. So that makes perfect sense, but the Mordor thing leaves me scratching my head, because I don't know how we're going to be doing having hearty meals around the environs of Ithilien and Mordor. Why would we be eating meals in Mordor after we just got the hobbits out of there? That doesn't really make the most sense to me, unless we are talking about, you know, not Frodo and Sam and the other hobbits are coming into Mordor to just kind of see what it's like, maybe. I don't know. That seems kind of out of place to me. So before I move on to join one of these, I just want to say each of these sounds really interesting. I mean, we have the diplomatic mission here, where we're going to be helping Aragorn secure peace and do all sorts of diplomatic type stuff. We have the Court of Lothlorien, where we're going to be helping them make preparations for presumably the wedding that will be going on, along with also just dealing with the aftermath of war that had taken place in Lothlorien and presumably Mirkwood. And so there's probably going to be landscape added here. I don't think there will be any landscape added here except for, you know, Mordor, obviously. So this will probably be taking place mostly in Mordor, I'm guessing, or in the areas around that at least. And then this makes sense because we're probably going to be doing Mirkwood. This is probably going to be adding in Erebor and stuff like that, which is really cool. And then the Hobbit area is, for some reason, going to be doing Ithilien and Mordor, but it sounds like it will be a really fun plotline. And then, you know, the Dwarven one sounds like we're going to be rebuilding things, possibly making a new colony in the Glittering Caves. All of this sounds fantastic. And so that's going to make the choice of which allegiance to actually align with be really difficult, because I actually want to do all of these different plotlines. They all sound fantastic. Of course, I don't know what the questing structure will be like. It might be very grindy, like Heightbold or something like that. And so, you know, there might have to be repeatables or something like that, or it might be very story-driven. What I don't understand is how aligning with one will make others be harder later on, because if we ally with one, all these stories sound like they're going to be in different places, so how would the questing overlap to be difficult. There's a lot of questions I have about the allegiances system. Another question I have is, how long will these allegiances last? Will it be a cutoff point right at Mordor? So after the Mordor expansion, the allegiance system just kind of goes away? Or will this take place even longer after Mordor, to where we have, maybe new allegiances, or we have to do, other things within these existing allegiances? So, for example, I'm assuming the Scouring of the Shire will be its own standalone separate thing, but will there be more stuff to do with the Hobbits of the Company? If you've built up an allegiance with them, will there be more to do by the time you eventually get to the Shire? It presumably adds a lot of questions as to, when this is going to cut off. Will us doing stuff for certain allegiances make there be story elements that we won't be able to see in just the normal story areas? How is this allegiance system fitting into the current game and the future of the game is a question that I have right now, which we're not going to really be able to see until Mordor and even after Mordor. So I do have a lot of questions about the allegiance system, but I am extremely excited because as I said, all of these descriptions sound just fantastic. So you can, of course, join them here, even though you can't do any quests or anything like that. So let's go ahead and join the Durin's folk one, because I think that's the coolest one. Alright, the first allegiance you join is accelerated through the allegiance levels, requiring fewer total allegiance points. Each allegiance you join requires more allegiance points to complete, until your fourth allegiance, which advances at the standard pace. Are you sure you want to join this allegiance now? So basically, for some reason, they're going to be speeding us through the allegiance of our first one, and then having it take longer and longer as we go through the later ones. But if you're going through the story that this presumably has, then it would make sense, wouldn't it, to just be going at the standard rate? Unless we're going to have to be doing repeatables and grinding and stuff like that, which this is starting to sound like based on what this suggests. But there's clearly going to be story involved, as I don't know how there wouldn't be with all of the stuff that it describes here. So yeah, let's go ahead and join up here. So we can see we got this whole new symbol, which presumably will load up all around. Alright, allegiance level 0 out of 30. So this is a whole new leveling system of allegiances. So you can level up all the way up to level 30. Presumably you have to grind up through different missions to unlock story missions along the way, I'm assuming. And you can see up here it does say 0 out of 30, and we can hide that symbol there, but man, that is a really cool symbol. And so we have tokens of service, which is a token of thanks from one of the many factions in Middle-earth, may be exchanged for goods at any allegiance hall. So apparently, even though we're being tied to one allegiance, we can trade at any of the different halls for the rewards based off of this, is what it sounds like. Or maybe it'll be reputation gated, or allegiance level gated as to some of the rewards we can get, but we can still spend like the lowest tier or something like that. Or maybe if we go to one of the allegiance exchanges, we can only exchange for our allegiance. I don't know about that. That doesn't, it's not implemented into the game yet, so we don't know. Also nice that it continues to have the description there for us to see. Something that's interesting that I don't really understand is why that there's a claim 1 and a claim 2 here that both has 2 tokens. I'm guessing that there will be different rewards that we can gain each level, is what I'm guessing. So as we level up to one level, we can choose if we want one or the other, and I'm guessing they'll be different as we continue to get higher up. Can we go ahead and join another one? Join. Alright, this is now the second one we have, and apparently it's active. And so yeah, we can choose if we want to set as active or not. So we're going to set this as active. You can see it changes the symbol, so you can clearly see which allegiance you have that is active, but you can of course be joining all of the different allegiances. That's very interesting. I'm very intrigued by the whole allegiance system and looking forward to see more information about it and actually go through and do quests and stuff like that. I'm actually really excited about this. I think it's going to be fantastic being able to explore these different storylines for the different groups, all at the same time, because they're setting it up in such a way that your character would only be in one place at any of these different times, because the different allegiances take longer and longer to get later on. So they're really trying to get you to just do one of these so that you can then make sense within the timeline that they're trying to tell here. So I'm really excited to learn more information about the allegiances system and this whole panel and how the quests will work and all that stuff, and if it will continue on beyond Mordor and all that stuff. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of the allegiances system and when you think this is going to end and how it's all going to work with all the different questions I suggested. Let me know about all that stuff in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you again real soon for more of Mordor.